Vanakkam. Welcome to this course on classics in neuroscience. We have been looking at neuropsychiatry, specifically the grand breakthroughs that happened in the field of psychopharmacology in the decade between 1948 and 1958. So, in the last video we looked at the discovery of chlorpromazine. In this video we will look at three other compounds, specifically we will look at reserpine, we will look at butyrophenones, specifically called with the name haloperidol, and antidepressants, specifically Iproniazid. We will look at these three in this video. We will start our discussion with reserpine. Reserpine was discovered from a plant also called as snake root in India. The biological name of this plant is Reserpine serpentina, snake root. It was used as a folk remedy in India for a long time for various purposes, but it was used clinically for treating high blood pressure or hypertension in the 1930s. It is not clear what was the active compound in that snake root. The active compound was later isolated by the Ciba drug company in 1950 to be used for hypertension. Surprisingly, other than treating hypertension, it also had a calming effect in patients with schizophrenia. So, this became very popular. So, there was a rapid series of reports in the United States, France, Switzerland and many other countries of the West saying that reserpine has a calming effect on patients with schizophrenia. Several people studied the effect of reserpine on patients. What they also found was that there was a Parkinsonism like motor symptoms when there was high doses. Remember, we saw this in the case of chlorpromazine as well, that there was a development of Parkinsonian symptoms when the dosage was relatively high. So, these drugs came to be called as neuroleptic drugs. This term came to be applied to all the drugs that counteract marked inner unrest or psychomotor agitation, or severe insomnia like schizophrenia, mania, paranoia, depression and other such relatively serious psychiatric problems. It had relatively slow action. Reserpine had slow action in general. So, if you wanted faster action, by mistake if you take higher doses, Parkinsonian symptoms will appear. A question is, why does it happen? Why do people develop Parkinsonian symptoms when they have higher doses of reserpine, for example? The mechanism of action of chlorpromazine is still not fully understood, but reserpine is understood to some extent. It turns out that reserpine blocks proton coupled monoamine transporters VMAT1 and that is VMAT1 and VMAT2, which are monoamine transporters. These monoamine transporters are responsible for packaging the monoamines or monoamine neurotransmitters such as dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine into vesicles. But suppose they do not do it, suppose for whatever reason if VMAT1 and VMAT2 are not able to transport these free monoamines to the vesicles, what happens is that these monoamines are oxidized by MAO, that is monoamine oxidase. So, essentially if VMAT1 and VMAT2 are blocked, what will happen is that dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, these monoamines cannot be packed into vesicles. That means that dopamine effect, for example, will not be present. This is the reason why these patients develop Parkinsonian symptoms. But after some years, this use of Reserpine fell into disuse in the field of psychiatry, but it is still being used in combination with other chemicals and other compounds in the treatment and management of hypertension. Another important class or crucial class of neuroleptics that was also discovered in the 1950s was butyrophenones, sold under the name Haloperidol. This was identified by P.H. Janssen and J.P. Tollner in 1953 and was found that these were more effective compounds when compared with for example, Reserpine or chlorpromazine. Surprisingly, they started their search for this compound in a completely new area and they found diphenylpropylamine. So, they started with the diphenylpropylamine series to study and improve the analgesic power of a member of that series called pethidine. They were continuously and persistently synthesizing derivatives with decreasing pain dulling and increasing calming properties until they ended up with haloperidol or R1625, which had a faster action, which had an effect that was longer lasting and whose side effects were fewer. Oh, that is amazing. So, the effect is better, side effect is not as much when compared with chlorpromazine. Importantly, the mechanism of action was also understood. It helped or it played a crucial role in improving our understanding of neurophysiology of the dopaminergic system in the basal ganglia. It turns out that haloperidol blocks the D2 receptors which are in the indirect pathway of the basal ganglia. Those who are interested in understanding the direct indirect pathway and the action of dopamine on the human body, please do refer to my videos in the other course on neuroscience of human movement. I request my TAs to share these videos both as links in the forum and also in the description of this video. So, please do check what is D1 receptor, what is D2 receptor, what is the direct pathway, what is the indirect pathway, etc. So, D2 receptors are part of the indirect pathway. So, these function by blocking the dopaminergic D2 receptors, essentially reducing the inhibition that is provided to the inhibitory indirect pathway. So, the details I am leaving for those who are interested to study on their own. Another major mental disorder during the first part of the 20th century, even today, is depression. It turns out that depression often alternates with mania or feeling of overexcitement. These two come and go. On the one hand, you feel overexcitement, on the other hand, you feel too much depression. So, together, when this pattern, when the cycle of repeating, alternating overexcitement followed by depression happens, this disorder, this whole disorder is called as manic depressive disorder or bipolar disorder. For the longest time, there was no real treatment for this problem. Electric shock therapy is a crude method that was used in the 1930s and 1940s. Actually, it is still being used. No one understands why it works or how it works. It is a crude method but it appears to work in several cases. So, it is still being used in some cases. The solution or one of the solutions came in the form of Iproniazid, which was actually developed for a completely different purpose of tuberculosis, to treat tuberculosis or anti-tubercular drugs. Also, the name was Marsalid and Isoniazid. What was found was that people who took this drug for tuberculosis often became cheerful and euphoric, they became very happy. People were curious, scientists and doctors were curious as to why this happens, and Nathan Klein learned from Charles Scott and others, Max Chessin, that when Iproniazid was given before Reserpine, it converted Reserpine's effect from hypoactivity to hyperactivity. So, Nathan Klein got the first approval for clinical trials and launched with John Saunders and Harry Loomer in November 1956. From the day of hypothesis to the day of launch as the drug, it took about a year or less to launch Iproniazid. We can discuss whether that was acceptable or not today, but those were the good old days. This was 1956. So, this is how things worked in the 1950s. Compare that to today, for example. With this, we come to the end of this video. In this video, we looked at Reserpine, butyrophenones or Haloperidol and antidepressant drugs, Iproniazid. Thank you for your attention.